We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We continue our conversation with Liberty Nation senior political analyst, Tim Donner. Tim, thanks for sticking around. Now, we were talking about the problems that the Democratic Party has faced, and specifically with Joe Biden refusing to admit that his disastrous presidency was anything to do with the disastrous, again, defeat of Kamala Harris in November 2024. But there is one person within that party, at least one now, who seems to think that the problem was that they didn't run a primary. Now, pretty much everybody, and I'm including specifically Democrat voters or traditionally Democrat voters, who would have liked to say in who their standard bearer was. But we had Amy Klobuchar, Minnesota, senator from Minnesota, last week, I think it was, and she said, you know, everything we look at in the rearview mirror after you lose an election, yes, we would have been better served by a primary, but we are where we are. Now, she's right, of course, because there were a lot of people who thought, well, this is very undemocratic of the Democratic Party. But I wonder if she's misdiagnosed here, because even if they did hold a primary, is there any way that the party apparatus couldn't get behind Kamala Harris?
Well, if you look back on that period of time in July, when Joe Biden dropped out of the race and endorsed Kamala Harris, the problem that the party had was the same one that they had for the 4 years of the Biden presidency, is that they were cowardly. They wouldn't stand up and say what they really meant. They wouldn't stand up to progressives, and they allowed the progressive wing of their party to manipulate Joe Biden into every kind of insane political idea, which is a major part of the reason they lost the election. Likewise, it's fine for Amy Klobuchar to say that now, but where was she 6 months ago or 8 months ago, more precisely, when it came time to pick who the next nominee would be after Joe Biden dropped out? But by all accounts, there wasn't a single voice raised in today's Democratic Party because they were too scared because she's a Black woman. And they were too scared because the progressive wing of the party, the wacko wing of the Democratic Party, would have been up in arms. All the white progressives would have been all upset that the Black woman wasn't selected. So it's pure cowardice that led to Kamala Harris assuming the candidacy of Joe Biden. And, you know, to say 6 months later, gee, we should have had a primary. Talk about too little, too late.
There's no courage there, right? There's no
it
courage. It
just reveals that there wasn't 1 ounce of courage by anybody who would stand up in that party, other than the single exception of Dean Phillips, the man who challenged Joe Biden. Never had a chance, but the congressman,
also from Minnesota, I think,
from Minnesota, who said, Joe Biden is too old. He's going to lose. We have to come to grips with it. But, you know, other than a guy like James Carville or other strategists who were not directly involved in the administration, not a single person was willing to step up and say, this is crazy. We can't win this way. And for Joe Biden to say that he would have won if he had stayed in the race, in fact, it's very possible he could have lost 45 states, because people, even liberals, are not going to vote for a guy who is essentially a zombie, which is what Biden had become by the end of his term.
Yeah, although I agree with almost every word of your assessment up until the point where you say nobody's going to vote for a guy who's a zombie. I don't know. I think people will.
Well, five states might have. Five states, maybe 10. But let's put it this way. Kamala Harris only lost the popular vote by about 1.5 points. I think Biden would have lost by 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 points, because people could see
Yeah.
even though they were in denial. It's one thing to have a scandal like Watergate where people don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. But this was a real time meltdown. People could
Mm.
see it with their own eyes in real time. And to just deny it, who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I wonder if we don't have because people don't get to see the president on a day-to-day basis. Very few people get to see the president on a day-to-day, any president. And with Joe Biden, that was driven to a maximum that he was not physically seen by a large swath of actual human beings. He was, however, presented to the public through the lens of the Fourth Estate, which bears as much responsibility, I think, as the National Committee for covering for Joe Biden. And now we have so many voices saying, oh, yeah, of course he was in distress, in significant distress. And we tried to tell you, and I've been scouring the internet for times when they told us, when they told us that Joe Biden was in mental distress, and
They
I
said
couldn't
that
find it.
I think it was on November 6th,
Yeah,
the
November
day
6th.
after the election. No, I mean, the best example of that, Mark, is Jake Tapper,
Mm,
the famed anchorman who, was part of the cover up, although it's not even a cover up because everybody could see what was happening, but the denial of elite media, of legacy media, who refused to tell the truth, even though he could see it. And then now he's written a book saying how disastrous it was that Biden didn't drop out of the race and it's his fault they lost. Oh, nice of you to tell us now. No
yeah.
wonder 70% of the American people don't trust the media. And I'm surprised it's not even higher than that.
The other 30% think you're talking about Alex Jones. I mean, I watch Alex Jones as well. He's very entertaining. So there's two things actually I'd like to follow up on that, Tim, before we move on to a different subject. Is number one is just a quick thought, and that's Professor Jordan Peterson. He says that um, a totalitarian society is one in which everybody lies about everything to everyone, including themselves, all the time. And I wonder how close we came to that with the Joe Biden presidency, where everybody's saying he is, and I quote, almost everybody who had a word to say about Joe Biden, a positive word to say about him, he's as sharp as a tack.
Sharp as a tack.
It was a lie. They knew it was a lie. The people who were listening knew it was a lie. The voters knew it was a lie. And seemingly the only person who didn't know it was a lie was Joe Biden. And yet everybody went along with it. And for me, I know it's a tangential point, but for me, we were that close, I think, we were that, I'm holding my fingers very close together to accepting one of the first tenets of totalitarianism, where we accept that a lie can be the truth because it's better for something, whether that's our own
It's a
safety
sort
or
of thing where you say if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes
mm,
the truth. And the truth is, in this case, as you know about the old expression, the emperor has no clothes.
yeah.
But that story came from the basis of there was somebody who finally would say, hey, the emperor has no clothes. Everybody could see it. Nobody would say anything until one person stepped up, a young child, I think, as the story goes, who said, what's wrong here? The emperor has no clothes. And this is what we had to deal with. I mean, when you think about after January 6th, I think you'd have trouble finding 1% of political analysts and even normal people across the country who would have thought Donald Trump had a chance of ever returning to power. And yet, here he is, thanks to Joe Biden in large part.
Indeed. Now we're going to be back with Tim Donner after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.